He choked his wife to death in sleep to take over her father's multi-million assets. This is the craziest story you'll hear this year. Comment where you are watching from and subscribe. Let's begin the ride. The emergency call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in September. The address was in Baldwin Hills, one of Los Angeles' most affluent black neighborhoods, where sprawling homes overlook the city lights. The caller's voice was frantic, breathless, desperate. "Please, you have to help me. My wife, she's not breathing. I woke up and she's not breathing. Please send someone now." Marcus Whitmore gave the 911 operator his address, answered her questions in a panicked rush, and then the line went silent except for the sound of him sobbing. By the time paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, Marcus was performing CPR on his wife Vanessa, his hands moving mechanically on her chest, his face streaked with tears. But Vanessa Whitmore, 34 years old, daughter of real estate mogul Charles Bennett, was already gone. Her body was still warm, but there was no pulse, no breath, no life. The paramedics took over anyway, going through the motions even though they could see it was too late. They transported her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead at 4:23 a.m. Marcus collapsed in the hospital waiting room, his sister Keisha rushing in to hold him as he wept. To everyone watching, he was a devastated husband who'd woken up to find the love of his life dead beside him. A tragic, inexplicable loss. But Detective Raymond Pierce of the LAPD wasn't so sure. Pierce had been working homicide for 17 years, and something about the scene bothered him. The way Marcus's hands had trembled just a little too perfectly when he'd given his statement. The way his eyes had darted to Vanessa's body and then quickly away, as if he couldn't bear to look, but also as if he was checking to make sure she was really dead. Small things. Instincts. The kind of red flags that separated murders from accidents. The medical examiner's preliminary findings came back within hours. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, bruising on the neck consistent with strangulation, crushed hyoid bone. Vanessa Whitmore hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered, choked to death while she slept. Marcus was brought in for questioning that same afternoon. He sat across from Detective Pierce in the interrogation room, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a man in shock, but Pierce had seen plenty of killers who could fake grief. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm very sorry for your loss," Pierce began, "but I need to ask you some questions about last night." "I already told the officers everything," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "I went to bed around 11. Vanessa was already asleep. I woke up around 3:30 and realized she wasn't breathing. I tried to help her, but..." His voice broke. "I couldn't save her." "Did you and Vanessa have any arguments recently? Any problems in the marriage?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "No. We were happy. We were planning to start a family." "This doesn't make any sense." "The medical examiner found evidence of strangulation," Pierce said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Vanessa was murdered, Mr. Whitmore. Someone killed her while she slept in your bed." Marcus's eyes widened, and for a moment, Pierce saw something flash across his face. Not shock. Not grief. Something calculating. But then it was gone. Replaced by horror. "What? No, that's impossible. Who would want to hurt Vanessa?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Pierce said. "Was there anyone who had problems with her? Anyone who might have broken into your home?" "I don't know. I can't think of anyone. Vanessa was loved by everyone." They talked for another hour, but Marcus stuck to his story. He'd slept through the night, heard nothing, knew nothing. When Pierce finally let him go, it was with the understanding that he shouldn't leave town. Outside the interrogation room, Pierce's partner, Detective Angela Martinez, was waiting with a laptop. "I've been digging into Marcus Whitmore's background," she said, "and I found something interesting." She pulled up financial records on the screen. Marcus is a financial consultant, runs his own firm. On paper, he's doing okay, but when you look closer, he's drowning. Credit card debt, business loans he can't pay back, a lifestyle he can't afford. He's been hemorrhaging money for the past 2 years. "How much are we talking?" Pierce asked. $700,000 in the hole," Martinez said. "And it's getting worse. His business is failing, he's got creditors threatening lawsuits, and he's been pulling money from joint accounts he shares with Vanessa to cover his debts." Pierce leaned back against the wall. "What about Vanessa? What was her financial situation?" "That's where it gets interesting," Martinez said. "Vanessa's father, Charles Bennett, is worth over $80 million. He built a real estate empire, owns commercial properties all over Southern California. Vanessa was his only child, set to inherit everything. Was she wealthy in her own right? She had a trust fund worth about $5 million, managed by her father. But here's the thing. Vanessa couldn't touch the principal. She got a monthly allowance, comfortable but not extravagant. The real money was locked up until Charles died. So Marcus couldn't get his hands on it while she was alive," Pierce said. "Not without her father's approval, which apparently wasn't happening. I talked to Charles Bennett's attorney this morning. He said Charles was concerned about Marcus's spending habits and had specifically structured Vanessa's trust to protect her from his debts. Pierce felt the case starting to take shape in his mind. What happens to the trust now that Vanessa's dead? Martinez smiled grimly. Everything goes to her surviving spouse. Marcus Whitmore just became a very wealthy man. They brought Marcus back in the next day, this time with his attorney present. Marcus had hired Gerald Thompson, one of Lust's top criminal defense lawyers, which told Pierce that Marcus knew he was in trouble. "My client is grieving the loss of his wife," Thompson said before Pierce could even start. "Unless you have evidence linking him to her death, this questioning amounts to harassment." "We have evidence that your client was in severe financial distress," Pierce said. $700,000 in debt, a failing business, and creditors closing in. "We also have evidence that he stands to inherit his wife's entire estate now that she's dead." "That's circumstantial," Thompson said. "Motive isn't proof of murder." "You're right," Pierce agreed. "But here's what isn't circumstantial. The petechial hemorrhaging in Vanessa's eyes, the bruising on her neck, the crushed hyoid bone. Someone strangled her with their bare hands. And the only person in the house when she died was your client." Marcus leaned forward, his face intense. "I didn't kill my wife. I loved her. We were building a life together." "Were you building a life? Or were you building an exit strategy?" Pierce asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you married into money, spent yourself into a hole, and then decided the only way out was to kill the woman you promised to love and protect." "That's a disgusting accusation," Thompson interjected. "Detective, either charge my client or we're leaving." They didn't have enough to charge him yet. Not quite, but Pierce knew he was right. He could feel it in his gut. Marcus Whitmore had killed his wife for money, and Pierce was going to prove it. The investigation intensified. Martinez interviewed Vanessa's friends, family, and co-workers at the non-profit where she'd worked as a program director. The picture that emerged was of a woman who'd been increasingly unhappy in her marriage. Her best friend, Nicole Stevens, broke down crying in the interview room. "She told me 3 months ago that she was thinking about divorce," Nicole said. "Marcus had been lying to her about money, taking cash from their joint account without telling her. She confronted him, and he promised to get help, to stop the spending. But it just got worse." "Did she tell her father about this?" Martinez asked. Nicole nodded. "Charles knew. He wanted her to leave Marcus, but Vanessa kept giving him chances. She said Marcus was under a lot of stress, that his business was struggling, that he just needed time to turn things around. She believed in him." "When was the last time you talked to her?" 2 days before she died," Nicole said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "She called me and said she'd made a decision. She was going to ask Marcus for a divorce. She said she couldn't keep living with someone who lied to her, who treated her like an ATM machine instead of a wife." Martinez leaned forward. "Did she tell Marcus this?" "I don't know. She was planning to talk to him that weekend. But then..." Nicole couldn't finish the sentence. Pierce and Martinez brought this information to the district attorney, along with the financial evidence and the forensic findings. The DA agreed they had enough for an arrest. Marcus Whitmore was taken into custody on a Friday afternoon. The news spread quickly through Baldwin Hills and beyond. Charles Bennett, Vanessa's father, released a statement through his attorney. "My daughter was a beautiful soul who saw the best in everyone. She gave her heart to a man who didn't deserve it, and he took everything from her, including her life. I will not rest until justice is served." The trial began 4 months later. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Marcus Whitmore had married Vanessa Bennett for her money, spent himself into debt, and when she threatened to divorce him, he'd killed her to ensure he'd inherit her estate. The defense argued that the prosecution's case was all circumstantial, that there was no physical evidence tying Marcus to the murder, and that the couple had been happy together. Gerald Thompson painted a picture of a loving husband who'd woken up to a nightmare. But the prosecution had witnesses. They had Nicole Stevens testifying about Vanessa's plans to divorce Marcus. They had financial experts walking the jury through Marcus's massive debts and his motive to kill. They had the medical examiner explaining in graphic detail how Vanessa had died, how someone had wrapped their hands around her throat and squeezed until she stopped breathing. And they had something else, forensic evidence that the defense hadn't anticipated. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic pathologist, took the stand on the 3rd day of trial. She explained that she'd found trace amounts of Marcus's skin cells under Vanessa's fingernails, suggesting she'd scratched at her attacker's hands while being strangled. "Mr. Whitmore claims he performed CPR on his wife," Dr. Chen testified. "But the skin cells we found weren't on her chest where his hands would have been during CPR. They were under her nails, in a pattern consistent with her trying to pry someone's hands off her throat." The courtroom erupted. Thompson objected, calling the evidence unreliable, but the judge allowed it. The jury saw crime scene photos showing scratches on Marcus's hands, scratches he'd claimed came from trying to save his wife. The prosecution also presented phone records showing that Marcus had been researching ways to kill someone without leaving evidence. His search history from 2 weeks before Vanessa's death included queries like how long does it take to strangle someone, can you strangle someone without leaving marks, and how to make a murder look like natural causes. Marcus's face went pale as his internet searches were displayed on screens around the courtroom. Thompson tried to explain them away. His client had been watching crime dramas, he was curious about forensics, it meant nothing. But the damage was done. The final nail in the prosecution's case came from an unexpected source. Marcus's sister Keisha. She'd been his alibi, his supporter throughout the investigation. But 3 weeks before the trial, she'd gone to Detective Pierce with information that had been eating at her conscience. Keisha took the stand looking small and broken. She wouldn't look at Marcus as she spoke. 2 months before Vanessa died, Marcus came to my house late at night, she testified. He was drunk and emotional. He told me that Vanessa was going to leave him, that her father was trying to turn her against him. He said he'd lose everything. What else did he say? The prosecutor asked gently. Keisha's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said, if she leaves me, I get nothing. But if something happened to her, he didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. I knew. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Because he's my brother, Keisha said, finally looking at Marcus with tears streaming down her face. I told myself he didn't mean it, that he was just venting. But after she died, after I saw him at the hospital, I knew he'd done it, and I've been living with that knowledge every day. Marcus stood up in the courtroom, his face contorted with rage. You're lying. Keisha, how can you do this to me? The bailiffs moved to restrain him, and the judge ordered him to sit down, but everyone had seen it. The mask slipping, the real Marcus Whitmore emerging from behind the grieving husband facade. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Marcus stood to hear the verdict with his hands gripping the defense table so hard his knuckles went white. We the jury find the defendant, Marcus Whitmore, guilty of murder in the first degree. Marcus's legs buckled. Thompson caught him, but Marcus was already shaking his head, denying what was happening. In the gallery, Charles Bennett closed his eyes and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Charles Bennett was allowed to give a victim impact statement. He walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. A man who'd built an empire but couldn't protect his only daughter. Vanessa was my light, he said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. She was kind, generous, always seeing the best in people. When she brought Marcus home and told me she wanted to marry him, I had reservations. Something about him felt off. But she loved him, and I wanted her to be happy. He turned to look directly at Marcus. You came into our family with lies. You pretended to love my daughter while all you saw was dollar signs. And when she finally saw through you, when she was ready to walk away and start over, you killed her. You took her from this world because you couldn't stand the thought of losing access to her money. Charles's voice broke. The last time I saw Vanessa, she hugged me and told me she loved me. She said she was going to make some changes in her life, that she was going to be okay. That was 3 days before you murdered her. 3 days before you stole her future, her chance to find real love, her chance to have the family she always wanted. He wiped his eyes. I hope you spend every day in prison thinking about what you took from this world. Not the money you wanted so badly, but a human being who loved you and trusted you. That's what you destroyed. The judge sentenced Marcus Whitmore to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Marcus finally broke down completely, sobbing and calling out for mercy that would never come. Detective Pierce watched him go, feeling the satisfaction that came with closing a case but also the sadness that always accompanied these moments. Another life wasted, another family destroyed, all because of greed. In the months after the trial, more details emerged about Marcus's deception. Financial investigators discovered that he'd been embezzling from his own clients, running a scheme that was on the verge of being exposed. He'd needed money desperately, not just to pay his debts but to avoid criminal charges for fraud. Vanessa's murder hadn't been just about inheritance. It had been about survival. Marcus had been drowning, and in his desperation, he'd decided that his wife's death was the only lifeline available. The irony was that if Marcus had simply been honest with Vanessa about his financial problems, she might have helped him. Her friend said she was generous, always willing to support people she cared about. Charles Bennett, despite his reservations about Marcus, might have given him another chance if he'd asked for help instead of resorting to murder. But Marcus had been too proud, too convinced he could manipulate his way out of every problem. He'd seen Vanessa not as a person but as an asset to be acquired and eventually liquidated. And that cold calculation had been his downfall. Charles Bennett used Vanessa's trust fund to establish a foundation in her name, supporting causes she'd cared about, education for underprivileged children, domestic violence prevention, and programs helping young women build financial independence. The foundation's mission statement ended with words that captured Vanessa's spirit. She believed in second chances and the power of trust. Let us honor her memory by building a world where that trust is deserved. Nicole Stevens, Vanessa's best friend, became the foundation's executive director. She kept a photo of Vanessa on her desk, a candid shot from a girls' weekend in Napa Valley where Vanessa was laughing, head thrown back, looking genuinely happy. It had been taken a year before she met Marcus, before everything went wrong. "I think about her every day," Nicole told a reporter on the foundation's first anniversary. "I think about the life she should have had, the children she wanted, the difference she would have made in this world." Marcus Whitmore took all of that away because he valued money more than humanity. In prison, Marcus maintained his innocence for the first year. He filed appeals, claiming ineffective counsel and tainted evidence. All were denied. Slowly, the reality of his situation set in. He would die in prison, his name forever associated with one of the most cold-blooded murders in Los Angeles history. His sister Keisha never visited him. The guilt of testifying against her brother was something she carried, but so was the knowledge that she'd done the right thing. She'd chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over blood. Detective Pierce kept the case file in his office, even after retiring 5 years later. It wasn't his most complex case or his most difficult, but it was the one that stayed with him, because it reminded him of a fundamental truth about human nature. People were capable of extraordinary evil when they prioritized money and status over love and integrity. Charles Bennett lived for another 15 years after Vanessa's death. He never remarried, never stopped missing his daughter. He grew the foundation until it was one of the most influential nonprofits in California, touching thousands of lives. On his deathbed, surrounded by friends and foundation staff who'd become like family, his last words were, "Tell Vanessa I kept my promise. I made sure she mattered." The foundation continues to this day, now run by a new generation of leaders who never knew Vanessa personally but who understand the power of her story. They know about Marcus Whitmore, about the betrayal and the murder, but that's not what they focus on. They focus on Vanessa's life, not her death, on her kindness, not his cruelty, because in the end, that's what mattered. Marcus Whitmore had thought he could steal Vanessa's legacy along with her life and her money, but he'd failed. Her legacy lived on in the children educated by her foundation, the women empowered by her programs, the families saved from violence by the resources she'd provided. Marcus got what he wanted, access to Vanessa's money, at least temporarily. But he lost everything that actually mattered: his freedom, his family, his humanity. He'd traded a life for dollars, and discovered too late that it was the worst deal anyone could make. In his cell at California State Prison, Marcus Whitmore aged badly. The confidence and charm that had once made him successful with clients and attractive to Vanessa faded, replaced by the hollow shell of a man who'd destroyed everything for nothing. Other inmates knew his story. They knew he'd killed his wife for money. Even in prison, where violent criminals were common, that particular crime earned him contempt. 20 years after Vanessa's death, a journalist writing a book about financial motive murders requested an interview with Marcus. He agreed, perhaps hoping for a chance to rewrite history or garner sympathy. "Do you ever think about Vanessa?" the journalist asked him. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Every day. I think about the life we could have had if I'd just been honest with her. If I'd asked for help instead of..." He trailed off. "Instead of killing her?" the journalist prompted. "I didn't plan it," Marcus said, which was a lie. The internet searches and the conversation with Keisha proved premeditation. "It just happened. I woke up that night, and she was there next to me, and I just thought about everything I was going to lose. And He stopped again. "You strangled her while she slept." Marcus nodded, tears rolling down his face. "I can still feel her nails digging into my hands, trying to stop me. I can still see her eyes opening, looking at me with confusion and then fear. She didn't understand what was happening at first. She thought maybe I was having a nightmare, that I didn't know what I was doing." "But you knew," the journalist said. "I knew," Marcus admitted. "And I kept going anyway, because I'd already started, and stopping would mean facing what I was doing. So I finished it. I held on until she stopped moving. And then I lay back down next to her body and tried to figure out how I was going to explain it." "Do you regret it?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What kind of question is that? Of course I regret it. I regret every second of it. But regret doesn't bring her back. Regret doesn't give me back my life. I sit in this cell and I think about the man I used to be, the man Vanessa fell in love with, and I don't even recognize him anymore." "Who was that man?" the journalist asked. "Someone who had potential," Marcus said. "Someone who could have built something real instead of just trying to take shortcuts. But that man got scared. He got desperate, and he made choices that can never be undone." The interview was published as part of a larger book on murder for financial gain. In it, Marcus became a cautionary tale about the destructive power of greed and the illusion that money could solve every problem. The book dedicated its final chapter to Vanessa, telling the story of her foundation and the lives it had changed. Nicole Stevens read the book when it came out. She read Marcus's confession, his expressions of regret, and felt nothing but disgust. "He wants sympathy now," she told Charles's widow, who'd become a close friend. He wants people to understand him, to see him as a human being who made mistakes. But Vanessa's dead. Understanding him doesn't bring her back. The foundation held its annual gala that year on what would have been Vanessa's 55th birthday. 500 people attended, raising over $2 million for the foundation's programs. Nicole gave a speech, talking about Vanessa's vision and her impact. She didn't mention Marcus at all. He'd taken enough from Vanessa. He wouldn't get her memory too. In the audience sat several young women whose college educations had been funded by Vanessa's foundation. They'd never met her, but they knew her story. They knew that a woman who'd believed in second chances had been killed by someone who'd abused that belief. And they'd made a promise to themselves. They would never let anyone make them doubt their own judgment, never stay in relationships with people who lied to them, never value loyalty over their own safety. Vanessa's death had become a teaching moment, a reminder that kindness shouldn't mean naivety, that love shouldn't mean blind trust. The foundation incorporated these lessons into its programming, teaching young women to recognize red flags, to protect themselves financially, to understand that leaving a relationship was sometimes the bravest and most necessary choice. Marcus Whitmore died in prison at age 68, 26 years after Vanessa's death. He died of a heart attack, sudden and unexpected, much like Vanessa's father had all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story. His obituary was brief, clinical. It mentioned his conviction, his sentence, and his death. It didn't mention his regrets or his final interview. It certainly didn't mention any achievements or positive contributions to the world. He'd ensured that his legacy would be defined by a single act of violence, a single terrible choice that had overshadowed everything else. Vanessa's obituary, by contrast, had been filled with warmth and love. It talked about her charity work, her kindness, her infectious laugh. It mentioned the foundation that would bear her name and continue her mission. Decades after her death, people still remembered her positively, while Marcus was remembered only as the man who'd killed her. Detective Pierce, long retired by the time Marcus died, heard the news and felt a sense of closure. He'd worked hundreds of cases over his career, but Vanessa's murder had always stayed with him. Not because it was particularly complex or challenging, but because it represented something fundamental about the work he'd done, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, even when the threat came from someone they loved. Justice doesn't bring them back, Pierce told his grandson, who was studying criminal justice in college. Solving the case doesn't undo the harm. But it matters anyway. It matters that we try, that we hold people accountable, that we send a message that human life has value that transcends money or convenience or personal gain. The grandson asked if the job ever got easier, if Pierce had ever stopped thinking about the victims. Pierce shook his head. "You never stop thinking about them," he said. "The good ones, the ones who did right, they stay with you. But you learn to carry it differently. You learn that the best way to honor them is to keep going, to solve the next case, to help the next family. That's all you can do." Vanessa Bennett's story became part of Los Angeles criminal history, referenced in law school classes about motive and premeditation, discussed in ethics courses about the corrupting influence of wealth. But more importantly, it became part of the collective memory of people who'd known her or been touched by her foundation. Her face appeared on billboards during the foundation's fundraising campaigns, always smiling, always warm. New generations learned her name and her story. They learned that she'd been more than a victim, more than a cautionary tale. She'd been a person who'd believed in making the world better, and whose death had inspired others to continue that work. Marcus Whitmore wanted to be remembered as successful, influential, important. Instead, he was remembered as a murderer, if he was remembered at all. Vanessa wanted simply to help people and build a loving family. She never got the family, but her impact on others far exceeded anything she could have imagined. In the end, that was the real tragedy of Marcus's crime. He'd killed Vanessa for money that he never got to enjoy, destroying 2 lives in pursuit of wealth that meant nothing once it was soaked in blood. He'd thought he was being clever, strategic, taking control of his future. Instead, he'd thrown away everything: his freedom, his family, any chance at redemption, for a payday that never came. The multi-million-dollar estate he'd murdered for went to Vanessa's foundation, used to help the very people Marcus had exploited and stolen from throughout his career. It was fitting justice, perhaps the only justice possible in a story defined by senseless loss. And somewhere, in the memories of the hundreds of people whose lives were changed by Vanessa's foundation, she lived on, not as a victim, but as an inspiration. Not as someone who died, but as someone whose life had mattered, whose kindness had echoed forward through time, creating ripples of good that would continue long after Marcus Whitmore was forgotten. That was the real legacy. That was what survived. Not the money Marcus had killed for, but the love Vanessa had lived by. In the end, only one of those things proved immortal. If you love this story, hit the subscribe button and comment what stood out for you.